Good afternoon. My name is Nick Osborne, and I'm here with Ricardo Acevedo, and we're career coordinators at New Mexico State University Global Campus. Today, we're going to be hosting a workshop on resume essentials. We're going to talk a little bit about why a resume is a key component to a successful job search, as well as getting into what needs to be thought through and then reflected and highlighted in the resume. Ricardo, would you mind just giving a brief introduction of yourself?
Thank you, Nick. My name is Ricardo Acevedo. I'm a career resource coordinator here at NMSU Global. Been in higher ed for 10 years in various roles, from admissions to recruiting and now to career services. Been here at NMSU Global about for a year and a half, and yeah, loving it, and definitely can help out with anything career services related, along with my counterpart Nick.
And similar to Ricardo, I've worked in higher ed for several years in student affairs as well as in career support. And oftentimes we're coming across individuals who are non-traditional, being that they maybe have been out of the workforce for a while or they're going back to school to update their skill set. So we routinely meet with folks that are in various stages of the job search process. So for today, we're going to talk about a couple of different components, such as the right mindset, the purpose of a resume, as well as what needs to be reflected and highlighted. We're also going to get into the applicant tracking system, which a lot of employers use now. Then we're going to provide some resources that we believe are helpful. And we're going to touch briefly on how networking and social media need to be embedded as part of the research of any sort of job, as well as the resume. And then we're going to conclude with some brief discussion points about why continuing education and your skills are so important. So, a mindset, if you're out of work or if you're in a job that you're not really enjoying, psychologically, that can weigh heavily on you. And oftentimes, when you're in this place, it can feel like life is not going to change. So, one of the most important things that you can bring to a job search is the right attitude and the right mindset. You need to remember that you have valuable skills, you have talents, you have potentially an education background that stands out. And you need to remind yourself that employers are going to benefit from your gifts. They're going to benefit from what you bring to a team. So you want to stay open, you want to stay flexible, but you also want to stay positive. And one of the ways I like to explain a resume is think of it as your first impression. You literally have seconds to make a positive first impression. So that's why it's important that you take some time and reflect on the content, the structure, as well as what needs to be highlighted, and then how you can best build a network and share your resume with the right people. So the purpose of a resume is to, as I just mentioned, to showcase your talent, skills, but also your motivation. We are in a time right now where there's a lot of change and evolution in jobs. And part of this is that we have to stay on top of changing technology and trends. AI, for instance, is an example of that. So when you sit down and you develop your resume, you want to make sure that you're writing it to specific roles and jobs. Although the convenience factor is appealing to just make one resume, you want to make sure that in both a resume and cover letter that you're reading the job that you're applying to very carefully and that all of those components are matched and highlighted. So general components are basically starting with the mindset of why should I be the one that you hire, right? A lot of HR folks, a lot of industries, they receive hundreds, if not thousands of applicants. So start with that question of this is why you should hire me. You want to keep it succinct and brief. And what I mean by that is you want to keep it to a page in length unless they specify for more information. You want to make sure that your skill summary is very clear, visible, and that it's easy to understand what it is that you know and what you bring to a role. Education, certifications, and any licenses you have, definitely make sure that those are there. And then you also want to touch on your work history with actionable results. And what we mean with actionable results is you want to explain how it was that you bettered a position that you are at. When I was hired, let's say, working for a company, I cut down on customer service calls because we had such a great flow in communication initially. You want to make sure that you're annotating and having all of that information very clear and easy to follow. And lastly, you want to make sure your contact information is there. Ricardo, do you want to touch on the ATS?
Sure, I could definitely take over from here. So, what are ATSs? I guess some common misconception is that you send in a resume and one or two people are going through the thousands of resumes. Not the case anymore, especially with AI and other softwares that help with automation and efficiency. So what the ATS does is it helps scan, filter, and ranks candidates. So what the system will do is, based off your resume and experience, and also had keywords such as action verbs, it will match it to what the rep is looking for. So, say if Boeing set uh, a resume score of 90% match, anything underneath 90% will get filtered out and it won't go to the HR rep, which from there will review the application. So it, that is used to maximize the time because obviously, a couple people can't make it through the thousands and thousands of resumes. So that is something that is used pretty often nowadays. The one thing you have to remember too is that there's not a one size fits all for a resume. Usually, it's good to have alternate resumes. So if you're applying for a tech field, have a tech resume. If you're applying for more of business related um, field, then make sure you tur change your resume to fit that type of field. So that's one thing to keep in mind is just tailor your resume towards the field that you're applying to. Also, avoid using anything that's going to take away attention from your resume, such as fancy fonts, graphs, pictures. And then when you're submitting your resume, make sure you submit it as a Word doc or a PDF. Sometimes employers will ask for both, but can't go wrong with either. One thing to make sure though, when you're converting it from a Word to PDF, make sure you check it yourself because sometimes borders may not come up correctly on the PDF. So make sure you do that first before you submit it as a PDF. Okay.
So as Ricardo said, an ATS is a way to efficiently sort through a lot of resumes. And the reason this is so important is you want to make sure that you're highlighting keywords, that your language is straightforward so that the system recognizes what it is that you're saying. And then to Ricardo's other points, it's that you can't just write one resume and assume it's going to meet and fulfill different industries. So you may need to write a couple of different resumes. You want to stay to more traditional fonts, and unless specified otherwise, you want to stick to a Word doc or a PDF. And this right here is an example of an ATS approved on the left with the green check mark compared to a resume that's probably not going to get picked up. It's going to get rejected. And although the one on the right looks nice and has a picture, stylistically it's pleasing, it doesn't meet the components and it doesn't get through the firewall of the ATS system. So unfortunately, it's probably not going to move forward in the search. Is there anything on these, Ricardo, that you want to highlight or mention?
I guess one thing you had definitely mentioned well too. The one on the right too. The reason why that ATS also may not pick it up, if you take a look, you can see there's a huge reduction of description space and keywords. So that's why on the left, you want to make sure you maximize all the space possible. That way you can include as many of those hot words and keywords in your resume as possible. Because if you look to the right, you could see that there's less job titles there. And also, a lot of the space is taken up by the summary and education. So that's just one other thing I wanted to talk about.
So we have some resources that we feel are helpful and we encourage you to go out to. And by saving this presentation, you can go back to these links. But some of them are very basic in terms of just providing a free template like Office 365 or Google Docs. So you already have some nicely prepared templates where you can go in and then input your information. Some other good key resources that are highlighted here are with regard to language. Or, for instance, let's say that you are a recent graduate from college and you haven't had a lot of quote unquote work history. There's a great link there on how to write a resume with little experience. And we highly encourage you to go through these, to sift through these various resources, to find the things that speak to you, and then to embed them into your own personal resume. So, networking and social media. So oftentimes there's that saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. A lot of jobs can come from networking, and whether it's on LinkedIn, that's one example, social media, but you might also find that you're connected to a lot of different networks without even realizing it. For instance, your teachers, your mentors, people from your church or community clubs like the Rotary, these can all fit into your network. Of course, LinkedIn and Facebook and other social media platforms are important, but try to make a list. Make a list of people, organizations, as well as different types of social media that you can begin to fan your resume out to. Another recommended practice is to Google yourself. See what comes up. Keep in mind that when you move forward in a job application, oftentimes before an interview or after an interview, they're going to dig a little deeper and they're going to want to find out more about you. They might put your name into Google and see what comes up. So you want to be prepared and ready so that you can, highlight any questions or anything that may be taken out of context. And that's also about like comments that you make, anything that's public that has your name on it. You want to be mindful that everything floating around in cyberspace is going to show you in your most professional and best light. Ricardo, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes, like as you well put it, uh, just the networking side is vastly important because it only takes, one conversation to spark a connection and get that contact in human resources or a hiring manager. I've been to a lot of job fairs where you don't know who you're talking to because they won't say it up front, right? So sometimes I've been surprised where I'll end up talking to a direct hiring manager or someone in charge. So definitely very important to take advantage of some in-person connections as much as possible.
So, education and skills. Again, as we mentioned earlier, there's so many changes now on the career landscape with jobs. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in, it seems that there's always a push to learn more and to acquire more information. It could be technical skills, it could be more emotional intelligence. There's a whole spectrum of things to pay attention to as you are conducting a job search, as you're writing your resume, but ultimately, as you're starting to move closer and closer to a career of interest. So, in this constantly changing work environment, a recommended practice is to be open to furthering your education. So, for some, that may be a bachelor's degree, or maybe you have that already and you're looking at a graduate program or a certificate, or maybe there's some specific soft skills that you want to refine or pick up. Public speaking is always an asset that is very popular with employers. Again, AI. AI is being talked about on so many different levels. Having some basic knowledge of AI as it applies to your industry of interest can be a really good strategic move. And then basic things like Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, having those types of proficiencies. Ricardo, is there anything you want to add?
Absolutely. And one way that you can stay in touch with the constant changing work environment too, start looking at these jobs in advance. So ideally, you want to have your target area or your target state where you want to work. Start looking at different companies and see how the field is trending. So what does that mean? And give an example. When I first started higher ed, originally a lot of jobs were good with high school degree or associate's degree preferred. But as the work environment changed and the job market changed, eventually it became associate's degree minimum, bachelor's degree preferred. To now, even nowadays, it's become bachelor's degree minimum and master's degree preferred. So the way that you can start projecting that is just checking the job postings consistently. Then you'll start to see, oh, okay, a couple of these companies. Oh, I remember checking this one a couple months ago. Now it's saying bachelor's degree and cert, and it's consistent with this other company. So that's a way to get a leg up. Is just track different companies monthly or even weekly, and then that will give you a trend of where the job market is heading.
So we obviously work here at New Mexico State University Global Campus, but we feel that there's a lot here that we encourage people to consider as it relates to career. Ricardo and I both work in career services. So we're constantly working with students, individuals, non-traditional learners, and their motivation is usually it's career based. Either they want to promote in a current job, or maybe they're looking to go into a whole new field or industry. Oftentimes, they're looking to raise their salary and their income. And so education is a huge commitment, but it's one of those commitments that can provide a not just a great return on investment monetarily, but think about how many hours you spend working. If you wake up in the morning and you dread going to work, it's probably going to drain your batteries pretty quickly. So we're not just talking about marketing yourself to make more money and to promote. We're also talking here about a quality of life. And we think that global fulfills so many things for those that are looking to do both of these things. It's affordable and flexible. All of our programs are 100% online. It's a top ranked, respected university that's recognized. And also, we have a team that we employ, and it's everything from financial aid, academic advising, peer support, as well as career support. So that when you become a student at Global, you're not out there by yourself in the cyber world. You actually have a team that is rallying around you, promoting you, and also helping you work through any sort of obstacles you encounter. Ricardo, is there anything you'd like to add about Global?
Yeah, that's well put, Nick. Typically, of other schools, you just become another number. Here at Global, even in the intro email, you'll see who are going to be your direct points of contacts, and that becomes directly available to you by in those emails. It's also included with a booking link for you to make an appointment with those direct contacts. As Nick had mentioned, that would look like us, student success coaches, and also including academic advisors. So we're a high touch point school, and we definitely, I feel like we do a very good job of not leaving students high and dry through the process and kind of just guiding them through anything that they need help with.
And so, what are some of the programs? Well, we have both bachelor's degrees as well as graduate degrees and certificates. Again, they're 100% online, which provides a tremendous amount of flexibility, especially for people who are juggling other commitments. Maybe you're already working. Maybe you have a family at home. So you have all of these different commitments that are trying to grab your time. And one of the big strengths about Global is that we recognize that with our students and we provide a platform that still fits complementary into their busy schedules. These are some of our most popular bachelor's programs, everything from a business degree to criminal justice, and then going into the healthcare fields like social work, counseling, public health, and things like that. In terms of our graduate programs, again, 100% online with the working professional kept in mind. Maybe it's time to finish that MBA that can open all sorts of doors. Or maybe you want to go into a whole other field and help people. So public health or social work may be more of the angle. And then finally, the last thing that we offer are called micro learnings. And these are great for people who don't necessarily want to go back to school or invest the time and the money at this point for a bachelor's degree or a graduate degree. But what the micro learnings do is they allow you to refine those skills that really stand out to employers. These are self-paced and they're specifically geared for career advancement as well as professional growth. So some of the programs may be business and leadership or tech and data. Again, you go in, they're self-paced, you complete these trainings, and then you receive badges that show that you've completed the training. And these look great on a resume. They provide a great speaking point during an interview, but most importantly, they're giving you that continued education so that you can get into this changing job market and really make a difference and land the job that you want. For more information about the microlearnings or for more information about any of our online programs at Global, the information is here on this deck. And then lastly, we want to leave with our contact information. We would love for you to stay in touch with us, to reach out if you have questions, if there's anything that you would like to know about any of our degree programs or a resume or career work that we've mentioned here. Ricardo and I would love to hear from you. Ricardo, is there anything that you'd like to close with?
We'll close with, thank you for you guys for taking the time to view this presentation. And we're more than happy to be your support here at NMSU Global, including, admissions, financial aid, and academic advising. So don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We're very student centered, and like I mentioned, feel free to reach out.
And stay positive. Keep that mindset positive and stay motivated and make sure that you are really applying to work that speaks to you and taking the time and finding out what those employers want and set yourself up for success. And we wish you the best of luck in all your endeavors.